Hello, everyone, and welcome back to WABAN, the movie and TV show podcast where an expert on the subject discusses things with an average viewer. I'm your host, Nim, and today I am joined by Joe Pesci.
Holy crap, I just realized I don't remember any of the names in this movie.
Well, that's why I said the actor's name. I thought you would remember that.
You had low standards for me, and
What do you mean I'm funny? Like I'm a clown? The way I amuse you? Oh, man. I thought his name was a recognizable enough actor name that you would remember.
I mean, I just know him as like the Home Alone guy, or Vinny, my cousin Vinny.
Oh yeah, my cousin Vinny.
Barely remember.
I thought I told you to go fuck your mother. Yeah, well, his name in this movie is like Tommy something. Tommy. I don't remember.
I just can't get over how you had such low expectations for me, and I somehow dropped even lower than them.
Well, because I was like, he probably won't remember the character's name. Because this is one of those movies where it's like easy to forget the characters' names.
Yeah, there's a ton
except for like maybe the main character, Henry Hill.
Okay.
But you're like, oh, okay, I didn't. Yeah, so that's why I was like, oh yeah, he'll remember the action. And I was going with him because I was like, he probably has the most like memorable lines.
Right. He's a very talkative and expressive character, I guess.
Yeah, he won an Oscar for this movie, I'm pretty sure, for Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Role, whatever you call whatever the category is called.
Right.
So, which I think is well deserved because he played it very well. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we watched Goodfellas. What are your thoughts on the movie? I've seen it multiple times, but this is your first time, so
yeah. It's interesting just the way it's set up, because it's a life story and not just a story, right?
Yeah, it's not like one specific. Yeah.
Usually, there's big overall conflict that builds up and then the climax and blah blah blah. This is just he's living his life and you're seeing it play out as a movie. Like there's no it's not structured the same way as most stories, and it's very
like there is kind of a plot. The plot is being like setup being, oh, here's what the life is like in here's what the gangster life is like. Here's what the mafia life is like, and then the conflict is like him slowly over time it falls apart kind of, and he's trying to like pull the life that he loves back together, and then obviously by the end it just completely falls apart. He has to go into witness protection and everything, but so there is kind of like a plot there, but it's just kind of like a plot that takes place over the course of an entire lifetime, while also just showing little scenes and moments within that life, little like vignettes almost, like little moments. Yeah, which I actually think it's done very well too. Because I don't know, I think it gives you a really good sense for like a lot. I think a lot of movies in this kind of crime drama, like gangster genre, a lot of them very much romanticize it and make it seem like this larger than life thing. But I think this movie does a good job at really grounding it and really making it feel real and making it feel like, oh, this is what it was actually like, kind of. If you know what I mean.
I mean, I get what you're saying. There's definitely a thing of like, personally, I have no way to tell if it's realistic, really.
Yeah.
But it seems to be done in a way to make it seem realistic. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think a lot of the dialogue and the actors, like, they talk, like, they sound like this is probably the way the real people would have talked, not in this, like, kind of over romanticized, like, fashion, you know, over, like, you know, that you might expect from, like, I haven't seen a lot of movies in the genre realistically, but, like, you know, you'd expect from, like, a movie like The Godfather or something like that. It's more, which not that that's, like, not a good movie. I mean, again, I've never seen it, but it's, you know, it's praised as one of the best movies ever, so it's, you know, so I don't want to
just
that, but, like,
I'm walking here, or you come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding, or whatever. Just the very exaggerated way of speaking.
Kinda, yeah, I guess. But I don't know. Like, I guess it just feels very, like, which I think it largely, they did try to do a lot to make it accurate, because, and I don't know if you knew this, but so I think I mentioned that this is based on a true story, right?
And I can tell by, like, the little blurbs at the end.
Yeah. It tells, like, what happened to them. Which the blurb at the end said Henry Hill is still living, you know, wherever it said, you know. But now he actually died. He died in the 90s at some point. But this movie came out in 1990 before he died. So, I mean, but actually, what actually happened was they were able to find the real Henry Hill, the real person. You know, like, I guess he came out of his, like, hiding, obviously, you know, in witness protection, you become a new person, essentially, right?
Right.
And, you know, I think it was, like, long enough after everything happened that he felt safe, you know, going out and, like, talking to people, whatever, about it. And they interviewed him all about his experiences in that life, actually. And that's what they, I think, based a lot of the movie on. You know, and I'm sure a lot of the scenes in the movie are probably made up for the movie. But, like, the general timeline of things and the general kind of, here's what it was like kind of things, you know, like, there's, like, I just think there's a lot of interesting details in here to give you an idea of, like, I think a good example of, like, how there's the difference between this movie, which tries to paint it in a realistic way, and, like, another movie that might romanticize things a little bit more, or, like, makes things seem more larger than life, or more, like, whatever, is that he, like, you know, in one of his narrations, he's talking about what happens when somebody gets whacked, right? He says, they come at you like your friend. Like, you don't know what's going to happen until it happens. It's like, it's not like in the movies where they all come in with guns and they're all, like, they come in confrontational, blah, blah, blah. You know, like, you might see, like, a big dramatic scene in a movie where it's like, all right, like, ooh, like, you see all the guys coming in and they're like, all right, they have a big talk with you before they kill you. Like, but, you know, like, we got to tie up the loose ends. We're going to take you, you know, he's like, no, in real life, he's like, you show up, you act normal, everything's normal, and then when their back is turned, you shoot them, you know, like, it's like, that's what happens. It's like
the guy who just got stabbed in the back of the neck after he just got in their car. That's it.
Yeah, that, and then, like, they come in having, like, a normal conversation. They'd be like, hey, what's going on, blah 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 blah. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, boom, shot in the back of the head. There you go. Like, and the thing is, like, that's probably one of the things when Henry Hill was interviewed, that's probably one of the things he told them was, like, yeah, that's the way it was. And I'm sure they interviewed his wife as well, maybe, who apparently he divorced at some point. Because I think in one of the blurbs at the end, it said he had divorced her at one point. They may have interviewed her as well, which might, if that's the case, I don't know. If that's the case, that would explain why, like, those are the two characters that get narrations in the movie.
Yeah,
I think
that'd
that's
be an interesting way to do it.
Kind of why they did that, maybe, because those are the people they got real quotes from. It'd be interesting to see if, like, any of the quotes, like, any of the narrations in this movie are real quotes from, like, those interviews. That would be an interesting thing. I'm sure not all of it would be, but maybe some, you know.
Oh yeah, I do also remember when it was like just before he started going into witness protection, and he's just talking to the guy in the diner, and his narration is talking about, how he's analyzing all these things that, it's a public space. He took a window seat so that he could watch anybody who would come in or drive up.
Mm-hmm.
And he noticed that he hadn't touched his food and all this stuff. Like, he can tell that he's planning to kill him.
Yeah, and it's because he knows from experience, like from when other people got whacked, probably what it usually is like. And it's interesting because in that scene, they're sitting there just having a normal conversation. They don't seem antagonistic. Yeah. They're just talking like old friends, like they normally would. But it's like, it is interesting to see kind of what that life can do to you, to where it kind of creates this like just whatever, feeling towards violence. It's like, oh yeah, this person you've been friends with your entire life, you grew up with, all this stuff. Yeah. You gotta kill them because, they messed this up, or they whatever, or, oh, they're too much of a liability to be kept alive because of this, or they could, whatever.
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, sure, you gotta do it.
The casualness and the snap decision making to do it. It's very alien.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like it creates this idea of like it's like a mundane, like, oh, this is just part of life kind of thing, almost. Whereas again, like a lot of other movies would probably make a whole big show of it, whereas this is just kind of like, it just presents it the same way you would present somebody drinking their coffee. It's as mundane as just, drinking your coffee in the morning. Yep, gotta shoot one of my friends. Okay. I don't know, it's just like weird.
The way you're phrasing it reminded me of a video game, Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm sure you've heard of it. But they treat death the same way in that game. Because even in video games, in any story, it's always like there's a build up to it. There's a warning, and characters are given a satisfying death for the audience, right? Red Dead Redemption 2 literally has your friends that you have been talking to die outright in front of your eyes in an instant from just getting sniped. And
right.
It's just like, yeah, that's realistic.
Right. In real life, it's not going to be this big dramatic moment. In real life, it's going to happen like that, and you're going to, Like the one guy, they go and they go into the one guy's house, and he's like, hey, you want to make a pot of coffee? Yeah. They go into his room, they're like, oh. And then he's just like, yeah. He's like, oh, get dressed, whatever, shoots him in the back of the head. It's like, psh. Yeah, you got to take the coffee to go. Like, they're just back to joking like they normally would. And he's like, oh, he grabs the coffee. What are you talking about? Don't actually bring the coffee. It's like, yeah. It's just, it's like you grow up in a world where this stuff happens all the time, and you see it all the time. And that's how you get to the point where it's just very much just kind of, it doesn't faze you anymore.
Yeah, people can adapt to anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of terrible, but and that's the thing. That's the way this kind of life is when you're in that kind of like gangster lifestyle. Even that kind of thing even exists nowadays, not necessarily with the Italian mob, the Italian mafia. I don't think that really exists as much anymore, because I think most of it has been like rooted out and like stopped essentially. But there are other kind of gangs nowadays, like different, very different, but still like, and it's a similar thing where it's just kind of like, oh yeah, gang violence, you grow up in that life, it's like that's just every day, you know.
Yeah.
Makes me think of one of my a music artist I listen to, Kendrick Lamar, rapper. He grew up in that, and he tells about how he was like, his first time he saw somebody get shot was like 5 or 6 years old or something like that. You know, like, okay, like that's just insane, you know. Yeah, but yeah. It's I do really like this movie though. It's very, I don't know. It's just, there's something about the way everything is cut and edited together, and the way that all the acting flows together to where the movie flows very well from scene to scene.
Definitely, yeah.
There's never really a dull moment. You're constantly engaged, I think. Like, there's never, you're just constantly like, oh, what's gonna happen next? Like, you know, you're just it very much invites you into this world, this interesting world, and then, you know, tears it down essentially. But like, the way, I don't know, just the way it brings you in is just, I just, it's entertaining every time I've watched it. I think because, you know, like sometimes when you watch a movie, you really like it, it's like it really hits you, really draws you in the first time, and then you watch it multiple times, you still like it, but it doesn't as much, because it kind of like, you've already seen it a bunch of times that your brain is so used to it that it's like, I don't know, even like, I feel like that hasn't happened yet with this movie, where it's like every time I watch it, I'm like enthralled watching it.
I get what you mean, yeah. That, it might have something to do with the fact that it's like a life story. It feels like you're just a camera, like a spectator, just floating around to these different scenes in this guy's life that are,
yeah,
just, I guess it would literally be like the most action-packed and eventful scenes in his life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, the movie is 2.5 hours long, and it really I don't think it feels its length. You know, some movies that are long, you watch them, and by the end you're like, okay, that's you're like, wow, that's like this it feels like it goes by very, very quickly. And you know, that might be part of it again, because it's like a life story, so it's constantly jumping to the next scene. It never stays in one kind of scene for too long, you know. But yeah, I think a large part of it too is the intrigue of like, because I mean, you know, a lot of audience members aren't really, you know, aren't gonna know a lot about this kind of life, you know, the life of somebody, you know, the life of a gangster, because most people aren't gonna really know that. They're gonna know like what they've seen and what they've heard, you know, all the stereotypes. But then to see this,
seen and heard is the movies.
Yeah, and so to see this, I think it really draws you in, because you're like very intrigued of like, oh, like what's this like? What's that like? What's the, you know. And you get a very good, you know, and I think the narration helps a lot, you know. I mean, I think narration, you know, I've said this before, I think when we like talked about Fight Club, narration in some movies can be done very badly, where it's very clearly just used as like a crutch to be like, to be like, I don't really feel like, I'm too lazy to like show this stuff, or I don't think my audience will get it, so I need somebody to tell them. I think this is a case where the narration helps.
Right, like I mentioned, the scene where they're in the diner, we wouldn't know any of that if there wasn't the narrator.
Yeah, and I mean that, but also like, I don't know. I think that it's just the way it's done. It's hard to describe. You almost have to watch it. It flows. It just flows very well with what you're seeing on screen. It flows with it so well that I think it's just very well crafted. You know, like I think a lot of times narration in movies will feel very just kind of exposition-y. It just feels like, oh, we're just throwing the information. This is the information the audience needs to understand the scene. So you just say it, whatever, in the most kind of boring way you could. Whatever, it doesn't matter. This, I think, it's very, very well crafted narration where it flows with the scenes very well. It just works really well.
Yeah, it's not like an info dump. It's like you're given the context to the situation that you're in.
That, and like technically it is kind of exposition, but it's done in a it's a very interestingly done exposition. Like the character's talking like the way the character talks.
Yeah,
you know, he's like phrasing things the way the actual character would. You know, it's like he's phrasing things in the way you would if he was just some guy being, you know, hey, we're interviewing you about what your life was like. And he's like, yeah, like it actually sounds very much like, you know, yeah, which I think works really well.
It sounds like he's talking to you about it, and not that he's just explaining it or you're like reading it. It's very conversational.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could imagine like you're sitting there in the room like asking him questions about it and stuff, and he's answering, you know. Yeah. Yeah. I really like the opening. First off, it opens with a scene from later in the movie. With the guy that just like, you know, you open again. This scene is played at least in the opening, and I think later on too, played so mundanely. They're just driving. Oh, what'd you hit a bump or something? Like, what? And they're like, oh, let's stop the car. Yeah, let's check it out. They open the back. There's just a guy there. Bang, bang, bang. You're like, oh. It throws you for a loop for a second. And then the great line to open it, just for as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. Cue the music. You know, however the music, you know, music is great in this movie, by the way.
That's another a very like reference line, isn't it? I didn't even realize that first, but yeah.
For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. Yeah.
I don't know about anybody else, but when I was like watching that first scene, they like panned over to Henry, the main character, and I was like, is he okay with this? Like, is he gonna be stereotypical protagonist and not be okay with senseless killing? And he just moves on. It's like, oh, it really set the tone for the rest of the movie of like, yeah, this is casual.
I get the sense in the movie, based on the way the character is presented, is that like he's okay with this stuff, he goes along with it, but like he's not as actively doing it himself. He's not the one whacking people, you know.
Right,
like
I definitely agree.
I don't like they never show it, at least, or say that he has. So it's kind of like I get the idea that he's almost like he's a nicer gangster. He seems to be friends with everybody. You know what I mean? Like whenever there's a conflict between characters, he's like helping out both sides. He's like trying to mediate the conflict. You know, like he seems very, yeah.
I definitely even saw growth with him in his speaking abilities, because like there was a time in the restaurant he was stuttering, trying to explain, you know, you're a funny guy, you know, the way you tell a story, it's funny. He's like goofing off with him, joking with him, pretending to get mad. But then by the end of it, he's like talking down Karen from blowing his brains out.
Oh, yeah. That's a good scene too. That's an interesting, because you know, I always wondered throughout the movie, I'm like, how does he actually feel about her in general? Like, I mean, like he definitely doesn't like fully love her necessarily, right? Like, I mean, he doesn't, there's always there's the whole thing of him like never being home. He's always out, never stays home with her, there's that whole thing. Like he's out with other women, obviously, too, as we see. And it's not like, that's something she's okay with, so it's not that kind of thing. But it's like, but he has such a hold over her that even though she's in that scene, especially, like, he's sitting there, he's like, Karen, you don't want to do this. I love you, Karen. And then as soon as he gets an opportunity, takes the gun and starts screaming at her, like completely switches tones on an instant. Like, I don't know, that's just always been a really interesting scene to me for the character, because it's like, does he act, when he's sitting there like, Karen, I love you and stuff, like, is he actually saying that out of like a genuinely? Not really. He's just doing it to save his life. Like, he's just doing it because he doesn't want her to shoot him. And he's good at manipulating her, which is kind of a little messed up.
Yeah, it definitely is.
It's like, but again, I mean, that definitely is realistic, right? I mean, that's kind of how, I mean, obviously in this world, men are the ones that rule it, they're kind of allowed to do what they want, and women, as you see in the movie, just kind of, the women just sit at home and watch the family, do homework, work at home, or do housework, whatever, and while the men are out either with each other or with their girlfriends, or because there's like that line where he's like, oh, whatever night of the week, that was for the wives, but Tuesdays, or I don't remember exactly, that was for the girlfriends. And like all these men in their gang are just hanging out with girlfriends, even though like they have wives. So I'm like, oh, that's how that is. Just like, okay. But yeah, so yeah, I think he's an interesting character. I think he works really well as a main character, because he works very well as a point of view character. For sure.
He's definitely portrayed as the most sympathetic one.
Yeah, out of all the men generally. You could almost say that like Paulie seems a little sympathetic. He seems very nice. I mean, clearly he's not. Clearly he's a horrible criminal, but like, because he's like the guy, the big guy that's like in charge of all, but obviously he's not necessarily. None of them are good people, obviously. But yeah. Try to think of other characters. Joe Pesci's character. Talk about that character.
Oh yeah, wild card.
Yeah, he's wild card. He's also extreme anger issues. Very extreme. Because I mean, obviously you get the scene where he kills the one guy, the guy who was made. He's which is a big no in this world. You can't kill somebody who's made if you're not yourself. They go to hide the body and everything, but it was just out of pure anger. Like he insulted him, and everything. And it's like, that's literally it, Or same with the kid who was serving their drinks, where he shot him in the foot the one day. And then the next day he said, he told him to go fuck himself, and then he just shot him. Like, yeah. It's, yeah. Because he's definitely that character who's like, he'll sit there. He's the guy who can dish it, but he can't take it, He's that guy.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know, there's so many examples in the movie where he just, in an instant, goes and like shoots somebody or kills somebody, and then goes right back to what he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's an example of a character who's just fully in that. Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's ultimately that kind of attitude that he had is ultimately what got him killed, right? Because, I love like that there's like a split second where he notices that he's about to get shot before he does. He's just like, oh shit. They walk him into the room. He's like, wait a minute. This isn't. I ain't getting made. Then bang. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. But yeah, I think it's interesting because it's at the beginning, closer to the beginning of the movie, first like half or so of the movie, it's just showing you the kind of glorified, like the nice side of living in this world. It's like, yeah, we can do whatever we want. We don't have to. We have all this money coming in all the time. We're not like these pathetic people who work every day for a paycheck and then, they're still broke, whatever. I don't have to wait in lines at the grocery store. I don't, whatever, this and that. Obviously because they get all this out of fear, right? Like that's what it is. It's like, you control everybody into respecting you out of fear. You go to a restaurant, everybody's waiting to be seated at a table, and they're immediately like, you're immediately like, oh, we'll get a table for you, even though these people have been waiting for a while, things like that. And it kind of shows you all that, and it shows kind of like it almost like lures you in like that. You're like, oh, this seems like, I mean, like obviously you're not like watching it thinking like, yeah, I could be a gangster, but like still it kind of shows you like, oh yeah, it's not that bad, right? Like, and the way it's described, it doesn't seem that terrible. But then it's that probably around halfway through the movie where it starts to show you like, oh, all of these bad things you do, all of this kind of, way of living, all the negative, the bad, evil deeds you've done, whatever, it'll catch up to you eventually, kind of, right? Like, karma is coming, be ready for it. Like, it's not as great as it's cracked up to be in like the first little bit of the movie. It led to, and then, yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to present the movie, because it kind of, I don't know, it builds something up and then tears it down.
I don't know if this is what actually happened or if you think so too, but it almost seemed like those changes, like in tone, happened in time skips of like a significant amount of time, as like the world changed and made it more difficult for them.
Yeah. I think that's definitely part of it. I mean, because I think that's a lot of what it was in the real world as well, because I think there's a long period of time where these gangs like just kind of ruled the city. I mean, this is obviously specifically New York City. The Italian mafia kind of ruled New York City for many decades, I think. I don't know exactly when it started, maybe, 20s, maybe even earlier than that. I don't know. But yeah, in the real world around the 80s or so, that's when it all started to kind of actually be fully, they finally started to get a handle on it and actually take them down. And one of them I'm pretty sure in the real world, Henry Hill is one of the biggest reasons they were finally able to take them down, because he testified against them, because he came out and spoke against them. He ratted them out, and I think that's an interesting thing. I like the way it's presented, because one of the earliest scenes in the movie, while he's still a kid, is a whole scene that's kind of similar. He got caught. Is he going to rat them out? No, you never rat out your friends. That's the big lesson he got that. But it's like, okay, at the end of the movie, you know, you're pushed far enough. He kind of gets to that point where he realizes, and then the same thing happens again, but this time he actually does. And it's like, he kind of realizes, you know, it kind of, the situation is flipped, right? Because back then it was like, they were all like, he was this new kid who's jumping in, everybody likes him, they're all helping him out, and he's like, yeah, of course I'm not gonna rat you guys out. Throughout his life, he's like, this is all good, you know, people getting whacked here and there, whatever. I'm good. I'm on top of the world. But once it flips on him, where he's the one that messed up, that got caught with something, and he's the one who might get killed for it, he then starts to, that's when he like realizes like, oh, maybe this isn't such a good thing. Maybe I should, you know, yeah. And then that's how he flips his tune, you know, and decides to rat all them out. Because obviously, you know, would have been dead otherwise.
Yeah, he really didn't have a choice other than them killing him for thinking that he's gonna do it anyway, so.
Yeah. And then there's like little things too. Like the one scene is kind of terrifying, actually, where Karen goes to talk to Jimmy, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, hey, yeah, you can just go around the corner, grab the, I forget what he said, like grab, like you've got some new coats or something, like you can take one, or it was something like that. And he's like, yeah, just around the corner, She's like, she starts to like think about it. She's like, because normally she would probably do it without thinking twice. Like, she's known this guy for many years. He's a friend. And then she like looks around the corner. She just sees these guys standing in there, and it's kind of dark. And she's just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. Because, you know, obviously they want to, you know, if they're going to kill somebody, they want it to be somewhere where they can, but, you know, not out on the street where people can see it.
Yeah.
And she's like, never mind. Like, that scene was actually kind of terrifying, because you're like,
I hated that so much.
Well, right. And like, I mean, I've seen the movie before, so I knew it wasn't going to happen. But like, you were probably watching like, because I mean, you know, for all you know, she might have died there. Yeah. And it's interesting. And like, for her, I don't really think generally, I mean, okay, there's the idea of like her character is, she's somebody who just kind of went along with it. But, you know, you do get the sense that she was kind of manipulated into joining everything and joining the life, kind of, in a way. I mean, yeah, she turns a blind eye to it, just kind of goes, you know, like, whatever. You know, like a lot of these people, right? Like all their wives, right? Like they don't participate in the crimes and the killings and all the stuff, but
it's still
they know about it.
Yeah,
they know about it. They're fully, you know, they all play ignorant. They're all like, oh, I don't know what my husband does in his free time, and it's like, yeah, you know. Like when they're talking to the cop guy or whatever, the witness protection guy or whatever, whoever he was in that scene, and she's just like, I don't know, and he's like, don't play that with me. You all know, like they all do this. He's like, come on, don't play innocent. Yeah, it's just I think it's just a movie that paints a very interesting picture of just what that life was like, and you know, it opens up showing the kind of the latter days of the glory days of the Italian mafia, right? Which are, you know, because for like I said earlier, for a long period of time, I'm pretty sure they were very much in power in New York City and other cities as well, but I think predominantly New York City. And then it shows, you know, when it all came crashing down. And yeah. But yeah, it's just interesting. And it's interesting too, like the idea of like all these, obviously they kill each other off because of whatever reasons, right? Like that's how they do dealings. And it's kind of, you kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of like shitty. You're killing off your friends and your partners and stuff, like what? But it's also some of this that is probably done out of fear, right? Like you're afraid of, oh, if they're still alive, they might, that I might get caught.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, oh crap, I did this big crime. I'm going to get caught and get many years in prison. How do I protect myself? Oh yeah, if this person's out of the way, okay, it's out of desperation almost sometimes. Like there's the scene where, there was all the guys who pulled that big heist. And there's a scene where all of them are being found dead throughout the city. Yeah. Because Jimmy just whacked all of them because he was like, he wanted a bigger cut, but also he was worried about them, giving it away who did it, like kind of because like they bought things when he told them not to and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of like an interesting thing of like what people are capable of in extreme situations, like in extreme fear or
self-preservation.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of that is. I also just really thought it was interesting how easy it was, like initially in the beginning of the movie, before everything fell apart, how easy it was for them to get away with everything, right? They said they had paid off all these people, including cops. And like there's like, it's so weird too, because like there's the scene where they're in prison and he's like, and they're sitting there having a nice meal with like they're sitting there cooking a nice Italian meal. He brings in a bottle of wine, steak, all it's he's chopping up the garlic, and they're like in a room together. They got this whole room together, just the four of them. They're like, he's like, prison wasn't so bad for us, It's like, if for the wise guys, as he referred to them as, but for everyone else, yeah, it probably was terrible. But for us, yeah, it wasn't too bad. Yeah, because it's kind of like this idea of like everybody respected them, mostly out of fear, right? Because it's oh, you do something against them, you're gonna get either killed, beat up real bad, something bad's gonna happen to you if you mess with them, kind of.
I keep thinking to guy who got his foot shot just for mishearing him, and then later killed because he told him to go fuck himself for shooting his foot.
And like everybody around him was like, whoa, that's why'd you do that? That's ridiculous. It's like, and then like, like Jimmy's sitting there like, what are you, stupid? And he's just like, what? But like, they're all like, come on, that was fucked up. You shouldn't have done that. But at the same time, they're not going to like do anything about it because he's older. He's more well-established, more, I guess you could say he has more seniority within the gang in a way, so they're not going to like, he's just some kid, whatever. So it's kind of like, it's just, yeah. It's interesting. Just weird how well that kind of works. Yeah. So, yeah, got some legendary actors in there. Obviously, Joe Pesci, as we mentioned, but also Robert De Niro. I mean, even if you don't know the actor very well, you've probably heard the name, obviously, right?
I've definitely heard the name. That is a thing.
Yeah. Robert De Niro was the one who played Jimmy, who's the one who was in charge of the heist and had all the people killed after the heist went wrong. Yeah.
Would I know him from anything else, or
probably not?
An idea.
I mean, he's it's a popular name, so I figured you probably heard the name. I doubt you would have known him from something else. He's been in other movies from the same director. So the director is Martin Scorsese. He was in a couple Martin Scorsese movies in like the 70s, I think, like King of Comedy and Taxi Driver. He's probably been in many more Scorsese movies. I think he's like Martin Scorsese's like number one actor that he works with almost. Even like more recently, Martin Scorsese did a movie, The Irishman, I think, which starred Robert De Niro. I'm pretty sure, which I guess Robert De Niro is Irish or part Irish, at least I'm guessing, because he stars in a movie called The Irishman, and in this movie, he's Irish. Right, because that was the whole thing. He's Irish, so he can't be made because he's not pure Italian. Or in Henry Hill is half Irish, half Italian, so he's not full Italian, so he can't be made either. Tommy is the only one who could be made because he's full Italian. Yeah, which is an interesting thing. So there's even a little bit of a race thing within the mob, which, I mean, it was the Italian mobs, that was it was specifically...
Yeah, it's in the name.
Specifically controlled by the people who came from I almost said Italia. Italy. People who came from Italia, the Italians. Yeah. So... Yep. It is interesting though too, because it's like obviously takes place in New York City, and there's like a lot of people from many different countries of the world, right? There's Italian people, there's Irish people, and that's obviously because New York City was like one of the main ports where people would come into the country back in when people first like immigrated here and stuff. So New York City ended up being like one of the most, I think, like culturally diverse cities in like the world.
Yeah, there's the whole thing that in history class you learned right around, like the first thing immigrants would see when they come in is the Statue of Liberty.
Right. Yep. Exactly. But just so happens that the Italian people tried to control everybody, but whatever. Some of them at least. And also I always forget that Samuel L. Jackson is in this movie, but he plays such a minor role.
Oh, is he the
dude Stax who got shot in the back of the head in his house?
Wow.
The one where he's like he's like, yeah, he was supposed to drive the truck away so nobody would see it, but he fell asleep in the truck and then left later to go, got high and left to go be with his girlfriend instead. So that's why he got whacked. Yep. I always forget that he's in it, and then I see him and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, he's in this for 2 seconds. It's just funny because it's like he's such a prominent actor now. He's such a well-known actor now. And to see him in a movie for like 2 seconds, whatever. Because, I mean, obviously at the time he wasn't like as big, nearly as big of an actor as he is now. It's just funny to me. Mm-hmm. Obviously he's a lot younger too. But, yeah. But
I didn't even realize that's. Yeah, I can't really think of him as like a small time actor like that for such a tiny part.
Yeah, just some tiny role who's in like 2 scenes and then gets shot, you know? Yeah, it is interesting. Because like I think most of the actors in this movie aren't huge actors. Like obviously like the main ones are like Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro. Those are pretty big actors. Ray Liotta, the main actor. I mean, he's kind of well known, I guess. Mostly I think he's most well known for this movie in particular. But like most of the actors in this movie aren't particularly well-known names, you know. And then it's like suddenly, oh, Samuel L. Jackson. Okay, he's in this. You're like, oh, that's like everybody knows who he is nowadays, you know. It's just interesting. But anyways, yeah, really good movie. I'd say, you know, probably one of the best gangster movies ever. I mean, not that I've seen a lot of classic gangster movies. I'd like to at some point. I want to see like the Godfather trilogy. I want to see like Scarface and like I know there's other popular gangster movies, but I think those are some of the biggest ones, the most famous ones. You know, I want to see some of the classics eventually, but yeah, no, it's really good. So I don't have much. Yeah. Do you have much more to say about it?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, yeah, because there's definitely a lot you could talk about, but it's hard to think. I think I covered most of the main things.
Yeah, it's more of like a deep dive kind of thing.
Yeah. All right, that's about it for that then. So, anyways, thank you guys for listening to this week's episode of WABAN. Next week, we are going to be continuing our discussion on Castlevania. We're going to talk about Season 2. We talked about Season 1 last week. So next week is Season 2, which should be a lot longer because it's 8 episodes instead of 4. The first season was really short. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into that show more. So if you want to follow along in the discussion, feel free to watch the show within the next week so you can, you know, actually, you know, this podcast is better to listen to if you've seen the thing we're talking about. So
it's kind of based around spoilers. So if you don't,
it's kind of we do not hold back from spoilers. So we don't necessarily warn about it. We don't have spoiler warnings, but like if you're talking about one movie for an hour, like it's probably gonna have spoilers. Like, how can you talk about one movie for an hour without spoiling it, you know? But yeah, so if you'd like to join along in the conversation, definitely watch the season. If you've only seen the first season or you haven't seen the first season, you can watch that too. It's not very long. If you'd like, you know, it's on Netflix original. So if you want to see it, thank you all for listening. There'll be a new episode every single Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time. That's when you expect new episodes of this podcast every single week. And it's located on multiple different platforms, including a bunch of audio platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and we also upload the podcast on a YouTube channel we have called WABAN. It's the WABAN YouTube channel. There's a link in the description to that. We also have some gaming videos we did on that channel playing Portal and Portal 2, and we might eventually get around to doing more gaming videos when we aren't as busy in our lives, I guess, which might be never. Who knows? So yeah, that's about all. Thank you all for watching, listening. I've been Nim.
And I'm Cub.
Goodbye, everyone.